Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The time is just gone 7 minutes past 7 p.m. Central African time. We welcome you to the show this evening, and you are tuned into the alternative voice with myself, Inayet Wadee, and we are coming to you live on the various platforms of Salam Media, and this interview is coming to you live on facebook.com/ Salam Media. Now, tonight, from now right until 9 p.m., there are two issues that we are going to be discussing. And recently, we've seen the standoff between India and China. We've seen the provocation, the troops facing each other at the border. And this raises many questions as to what has actually given rise to the standoff that we are seeing. And also, together with that, looking at India, looking at China, looking at the relationship between the two, and also what is the likely impact these two countries are going to have, considering the fact that these are countries that have populations in excess of 1 billion people, and very influential right across the entire world. And also, when we look at the Chinese presence in Africa, the Indian presence in Africa, and all of this put together clearly has got far-reaching global impacts. But we also need to put this entire standoff into context and to understand what the underlying issues are, what the currents that are playing out below the surface. And this evening, we are going to be joined by Salman Khan with the South African Kashmiri Action Group. And also later on in the program, we'll be joined by Dr. David Monyae, and he is an international relations and foreign policy expert. Later on in the show, we are going to be taking a look at the New World Order post COVID-19. What is the world going to be looking like when the coronavirus has blown over and everything returns to normal? When it is, we don't know. It may take months, it may take years. But the key issue here is we know that there is a global or a new global order that will obviously determine what the world is actually going to be looking like. And we've got Dr. Pilani Mtembu and Rutendo Matinyarare, who is with the Zimbabweans Uniting Against U.S. War Sanctions. Dr. Mtembu is with the Institute of Global Dialogue. So we've got some very interesting discussion coming up this evening here on Salam Media. But right now we're going to go across to be joined by Salman Khan with the South African Kashmiri Action Group. And remember, you can view proceedings of this interview live on facebook.com/Salam Media. And while we are waiting for Salman Khan to make contact with us, let us also just look at some of the background to what has happened between China and India. And in February this year, we've seen Donald Trump, and he had visited India. And some analysts are saying that he went to India for one simple reason: is he knew something was coming. And we know of Trump, he has made no hidden secret of his hostilities towards China. And obviously looking at India as an ally, as one of the states that would support the United States against whatever intentions he's had against China. But remember, there are many other issues that are playing out. We know what is happening on the line of control between India and Pakistan on the Kashmiri side, but also this is a line of control issue with regard to China. Salman, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, brother Inayet, and to
yes,
all the beautiful listeners.
very interesting article that you wrote, and welcome to the show, Salman. I'm actually quite glad that you are able to join us this evening. But I've seen this article that has been written, and it's very interesting when I just look at the title, when we talk about the Indian elephant and the Chinese dragon.
Yes, I think your preamble was quite appropriate, and I think it is the time that world need to pay attention to the Indian hegemony is not only related to Kashmir, but to the geostation, the prelude to actual what's happening, the conflict, the recent conflict, and the conflict that India and China are facing. It's got its historical background, but in the near history, if you look at it, the 15th of August, 2019, when the Indian unilaterally abrogated or revoked the Article 370, which provide Kashmir under the 35A a special autonomous status, that the Kashmir is independent state and it will remain as an independent entity apart from three things that India will control, which will be the defense force, the fiscals, as well as the telecommunication. But that was signed in contravention to the United Nations resolution of 47 of 1948, where the United Nations asked India and Pakistan to stop the hostilities after the 1947 war, the brief war. And after that, the resolution was very clear that neither the India nor the Pakistan have any rightfulness on the land of the Kashmiri people, which is as big as
Well, it
three times the
does
size
appear
of
we've had
Al.
a bit of an issue, and
Can you still hear me?
time is just gone, 18 minutes past 7 p.m. Central African time, and you are tuned into the Alternative Voice. I am Inayet Wadee, and we need to apologize for that break in communication with Salman Khan. We're going to try and get hold of Salman Khan in a minute, but we are talking about the Indian Chinese standoff, the
Yes,
provocation
hear me?
line of control. And I am led to believe that Salman Khan is back with us. We're also going to be joined shortly by Dr. David Monyae. Salman, we must apologize. We had a bit of a break in communication with you, but these are the signs of times that we are living in, and sometimes there are no guarantees. But let's just continue from where you were giving some historical background on the issue and this scare that has led to this latest act of provocation that is taking part at the line of control.
I think your sound is very crackling. I cannot hear you 100%, but I understood up to the point when you say the historical background, but the sound is very bad. Hear me clearly, or my sound is clear or not?
Yes, I can hear you quite clearly, Salman.
Okay, so I will continue. What I was saying, the historical background is that after the resolution was passed by the United Nations, and it was said in a no uncertain term that neither the India nor the Pakistan have a rightfulness on the land of Kashmiri people, which is 6,000 kilometers, three times the size of a Belgium, and India is supposed to be holding the referendum. Instead of holding the referendum in 1954, after a few years, they decided to actually accede in a way. This provided the semi-autonomous status to the Kashmir. They say we're not going to go for. They circumvented actually the resolution by saying that we can still hold the peace in Kashmir by giving the spaces of 370. 370 Article 35A, which belong to the Kashmiri territory. And as I was saying that earlier, that only the three things will be held or protected in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which will be the fiscal policies, your telecommunication, and the army or the armed forces. The rest of the thing, legislative authority, the parliament, education system, everything else will belong to the Kashmiri people. And the Kashmiri never accepted that. Kashmiri still wanted the referendum and India is being denying that referendum. Anyway, what happened on the 15th of August 2019, that India decided to break away with that special arrangement was made to the Kashmir and annex and unilaterally without consulting the stakeholder, which is Pakistan and China, because a lot of people will not be aware of the fact that India, the Chinese, because India war of 1962, where the India lost 38,000 kilometer of the Kashmiri land into the. So the Chinese watching that development, they are the only people apart from Pakistan to the case to the United Nations and say that India has no right on international disputed territory to abrogate or annex without being consulted. Anyway, that continue, but Chinese was not too worried about the Kashmir annexation that moment. But else happened in that time that between Pakistan and China, they built a called the CPEC, which is a Chinese and Pakistani economic corridor, which is the start from Kashgar, the India, what you call it, the Chinese northwest province, and linking into from the Kashmir, which is the Pakistan side of Pakistan, from Gilgit all the way to passing from the southern northwest to the southern part of Pakistan to the Gwadar port, which has been leased by Pakistan government, and it has been jointly developed as a sea, and that is a very geostrategic position. So now that route which link Chinese from the top of the Ladakh area to the south port of Pakistan. Now India for the last month or so start building the roads as well as the airstrip very close to the border. It's called Dolatar Bak and the Gulwan Valley, where is the recent standoff is. And when the Chinese realized that India actually posing, as you said rightly, that America is being nurturing, or the American is actually giving the idea to India for a regional superpower, and American wanted to encircle Chinese from, if you look at the Georgia, if you look at the Afghanistan, if you look at the the breakaway republic, certain republic from the Russia, the Chinese been Americans been building the Air Force bases or military bases. So one side they needed sort of a geostrategic position. They thought the Indian will provide them through the Ladakh, a very, very I would say the strategic position as a listening post or the watching post. In case of any eventualities happen in the future, the India as an ally will be able to assist America. Now, when this new construction of the road and barrages and the airport start building very close to the CPEC, which is in the olden day they used to call it a Silk Road, and now it's called CPEC. Chinese took a note of it, and then they not invaded. They actually walk all over India and Ladakh, and I think some people are estimating over 60 kilometers of the area has been taken over by the Chinese. Some saying 100. Indian is maintaining is only 35 kilometers. But of course, there is a standoff and is on a daily basis. There is aggressive exchange of fire and a patrol. As we're talking today, I think the Chinese and Indian was a meeting today
Salman,
to
can I just
discuss
stop you there for a minute, please? I
this
just want
issue.
to welcome Dr. David Monyae, who
But
is an
the
international
last week,
relations
on
and
the
foreign
7th of June,
policy expert
meeting
to the show
was
this evening
completely
as well.
volatile, and
Dr. David Monyae,
the Chinese
good
didn't
evening to
back
you.
off from any.
Good evening, and to all your listeners.
Yes, welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us. We also have got Salman Khan from the South African Kashmiri Action Group with us as well. And we are talking about India and China. We're talking about the relationship. Now, what Salman has done is he's basically painted a picture, some historical background with regard to the dispute. But the key issue here is looking at it from an international perspective in your area of expertise, Dr. David Monyae, in terms of India, basically a standoff or the provocation, which is basically a proxy provocation on behalf of the United States of America. Because we know in February 2020, Donald Trump had visited India, and the whole question surrounding China had arisen. And we are talking about two countries that have both in excess of 1 billion people, both countries who have a lot of influence right across the entire globe. So just your reading into this standoff between India and China and how it plays out with the global agenda.
This is quite a complex matter. I think given the historical overview, which my colleague has laid out quite nicely, it is that the two countries, not only do they have 1.2, 1.3 billion people, they are also strategically important in the global arena for a number of reasons. From a global south perspective, they are all part of the global south, emerging from 1955 Bandung Conference, in which Asian and Africans met for the first time in an anti-colonial, anti-imperialism, and to have clear-cut relation in terms of cooperation, developmental issue, cultural exchange. So these were strong ties that were established between Asian countries, India being an important, a clear-cut, as well as China quite important, post-1949 and post-1947 in case of India. So moving from a non-alignment throughout the Cold War, while they're having their own issues in terms of the border dispute that my colleague has referred to, and in the post-Cold War era, we also see these two countries, including South Africa, also joining at BRICS level. The BRICS, which is Brazil, India, Russia, and China and South Africa. A very important alliance forum in where they discuss issues of development, questioning quite key issues of the post-1945 world order dominated by United States and Western countries. So it is indeed from us in Africa, and South Africa in particular, at the AU level, that I think the main policy is that we don't interfere in internal affairs of our strategic partners. We are strategically allies of both India and China. These are quite important countries for South Africa and for the African continent. I think what South Africa as well as AU can do is to assist should they be needed in terms of reconciling these important allies. However, at a global level, it's very unfortunate that if any part of the two join with the hegemony United States, it does not deal with all outstanding issues between the global South and global North. And one is expecting that they'll find each other, they'll find a peaceful way of resolving issue without going to war, and they'll move forward with global agenda, which they both share. Both India and China want change in the global arena. And we're looking forward for this matter to be resolved quickly and peacefully.
Into the discussion again. And Salman, just looking at it from India's perspective now, we know of the strained relationship between India and Pakistan, and Pakistan's close relationship with China. You mentioned sea as well, and also in terms of India and China, in terms of the influence right across the entire world. And just to try and understand how this is likely to impact, I believe we have lost Salman Khan, but perhaps we'll just continue with Dr. David Monyae for a few minutes on this particular issue, because Dr. David, you spoke about the relationship of all the countries with Africa at large, and we know for far long now where there have been from the United States of America and also many parts across Western Europe, where China and India have been under the radar in terms of their influence over the African continent, and there has been the scramble for Africa for far too long. And just in terms of what develops between these two nations and the likely impact, and this possibly for Africa doesn't augur well, I would say.
I think if there is competition between the two in developmental arena, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as they do it without destabilizing the continent. I think Africa requires investments from all over the world, including China, India, and everyone else. And however, it has to be done with clear agenda, achieving the Africa's own agenda, Agenda 2063. As it stands globally, actually, China remains the only country with hard cash. As much as India tries to come in Africa, it does not have that strong hard cash to really do development at the scale in which China is doing, including the United States itself. It's not big in development, in building of bridges, dealing with issues of harbor, airports, and that kind of skill and the massive amounts of cash that are required. India, however, is quite good when it comes to IT. I think in certain areas, I think in my view, it's a question of each of these countries finding areas of their specialization and invest in Africa in a way that develops the continent without copycat your Western kind of investments, where they come in a colonialist manner and driving all issues and taking Africa as their own backyard. I think that in itself, it's something that within Global South, we all agree that there's a need for strategic partnership in development. As much as more and more of African students go to India to improve human resource development, also going to China. All this is good for the development of the continent.
Also, Dr. David Monyae, when one looks at the United States of America, and we know that they have been concerned about China's growing influence, and the United States has obviously built its own, what we call Indo-Pacific strategy. And part of that strategy is to find partners, to find governments, to find nations that will obviously toe the line with the United States of America. And in this relationship where the United States has identified India as one of the states opposing China, to align itself and also at the same time to find it a useful tool in the US opposition to China. And we've seen this before COVID-19, and obviously this has escalated somewhat during this pandemic.
It is an unfortunate development if that is so, because if you look at the history of India since 1947, it has always had progressive leadership that was aligned to Soviet Union, a leadership, the nationalist party in India has been progressive in dealing with issues of global south. And it is unfortunate that the current prime minister tend to be to your far right, and internal politics within India itself. It's not that good. But having said that, India does not really have, it's a democratic country, and therefore I don't think he has a hold on all Indians in terms of Indian people. They're very progressive. I don't think he'll be in power for too long, and one will expect change taking place within India itself, because the overwhelming majority of Indians are not in favor of a hegemonic imperialist United States destabilizing that region. It is not in India's interest to bring in a hegemon into the theater within the Asia development. Development of India hinges, and it will be well if it unites with China and all other regional countries and have a common agenda to development. I think that it is in line with all other neighboring countries. So it is not in India's interest to have any war, whether with China or bringing United States into that theater. So it is unfortunate that this should take place just to advance the current prime minister in India.
Yes, and I think also what is important to understand is things have been changing very, very fast and quite a rapid pace, where a few weeks ago, we wouldn't have expected Donald Trump to lose credibility, and we've seen what has happened. Is all it took was one life with the murder of George Floyd, and how perceptions have actually changed of Donald Trump, where he's also in danger now, where at some stage he thought he was guaranteed another term of office and he could win the elections, but possibly that may not be the case. So a lot actually changes very, very fast. And as you mentioned about the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, things are changing pretty fast for him as well. So whatever agendas that may have been discussed or that have been playing out could easily fall by the wayside, Dr. David.
No doubt about that. I think furthermore, I think within that line of thinking, it is in India's interest to advance compensation from Britain. Britain was the colonial power in India as much as in South Africa and a number of African countries. So what's current events with Black Lives Matter? I think you could see with the genocide that took place in India caused by Britain. So these are some of the issues that which both China also had 100 years of humiliation from imperialist countries, United States, Britain, and for India, a very progressive country, to join those forces, it does not really advance the interests of India in the long term. It might in the short term, but if you look at the military hardware within India, it depends on in the past Soviet Union, now on much more with Russia, and Russia and China are quite close. So I think it's a dynamic and fluid environment. Perhaps the India Prime Minister is just bringing United States just to gain more investments and get more benefit without necessarily going it further to provoke a war with China, which in my view, India won't be in a position to win that war.
Dr. David, we're going to go for a quick break. We need to pay some bills. We'll be back with you in a few minutes. The time 19 minutes to 8 p.m. on the Alternative Voice this evening with myself, Inayet Wadee. And remember, we are coming to you live on facebook.com/Salam Media. And we have got Dr. David Monyae, international relations and foreign policy expert. And we're also going to be joined on the line by Salman Khan with the South African Kashmiri Action Group. And we are talking about the standoff and this growing tension between India and China at the line of control, and trying to understand what some of the issues are that are playing out in the background. And we are going to be, Salman Khan is on with us. Salman, assalamu alaikum once again. Salman, okay, Salman, it does appear we are having a bit of a problem hearing Salman Khan once again. Dr. David Monyae, let's continue, and I'm hoping that we can get Salman on a better line. But the one critical issue I'd like to talk about is India, and there have been a lot of talks with regard to India and its corporates. And one of the issues that the Chinese obviously have raised is the poaching of Chinese-based companies. And we know what the corporate world is right across the entire world. And when we look at any development, any major development across the entire world, we know that there are corporate interests that are playing out. Now, looking at South Africa, and you mentioned BRICS and the likely impact that this could actually have on BRICS, and just to look at economic interest or the impact on the economic interests of both nations.
Both countries are somehow developing countries, with China making much more inwards in terms of development. When it comes to its own infrastructure development, is far ahead of India in a number of areas. I mean, China is #2 in the world, but by 2050, the two countries will be quite close, overtaking Western countries. However, with the tension between Washington and Beijing, there has been some moves within India to attract most of the companies that will leave China. There are quite a number of dynamic issues that we all need to know. Given India's own development and its business culture, it will really take time. It's not something that will take place within next 6 months, 1 year. It will take 5 to 10 years for it to really shoot big power companies leave China. China still remain most productive, most business friendly, and much more cheap labor for big companies. I really don't think that the politics of Donald Trump and quite a number of Western countries is in line with big business. Big business, of course, do follow the policies of their country, but at the end of the day, it's all about the balance sheet, it's all about the profit. And therefore, whether it's Vietnam or India or any other country, I doubt very much if they have the infrastructure such as one that China has, as well as policies to enable big companies to move in quickly and produce products and that will compete on the world market profitably. And we should not forget that within China, as it faces this competition and threat, something they've been waiting for too long, using the fourth industrial revolution, high-tech, robotics, China will also produce more or less same products, even some if when these companies leave China. So I think the real competition is going to be on pricing of some of these products. So we're going to have your traditional big companies leaving China, but while China producing more or less similar products that are going to be much more cheaper, easy to produce, and I doubt very much that India will be competing with the giant China at this stage.
Yes, I see we've got Salman Khan who has joined us. Salman, obviously we've been talking about some of the global issues with regard to this standoff between China and the United States of America, but and India. And just coming in from your side, and I want to focus more on the regional issues. And when we're talking about the regional issues, we are talking about India, we're talking about its relationship with Pakistan. And you hinted on one or two issues. CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Then we know about the Belt and Road Initiative as well. And these are obviously issues that is of major concern to India because it is to the benefit of Pakistan. Now, we just want to try and understand what some of the issues are and why India is so adamant in the standoff with China to the extent that it knows that possibly if there is war between these two countries, China obviously a lot more advanced from a technology point of view, from a military point of view as well. And we've seen this during the Chinese celebrations, where China had basically showcased to the entire world what a superpower it can be from a military perspective. Salman Khan not with us? Okay, let's try and get hold of Dr. David Monyae once again. It does appear that we are having a major problem. We're going to have to get hold of Salman Khan on a better line. But Dr. David Monyae, I think you heard the question, and just looking at the internal politics, the regional issue. We know of India, its relationship with Pakistan. We know of the disputed territory between India and Pakistan, and how much of this is as a result of this relationship that Pakistan enjoys with China.
I think some of the reasons for India's move at the border is much more informed by China-Pakistan relation, particularly development, the bridge that was developed, and the harbor, massive harbor that was developed by China within Pakistan. And Pakistan has been buying a lot of weaponry, Air Force planes, and quite a number of sophisticated weaponry from China. And that did not please India at all. And in terms of dealing with these issues, these are some of the issues that at a bilateral relation, and both Beijing and India could resolve without necessarily going to war, given the mere fact that India, I mean China in particular, it's also not happy with the manner in which India has been drawing United States much more closer, with a clear understanding that United States has many military bases within the region, as well as at the sea, in a way of trying to strangulate and suffocate China, also to somehow trying to stop China's rise, as well as stop China's move on its Belt Road Initiative. So these are some of the dynamics in which United States is not only approaching India, is also indirectly approaching Vietnam, a socialist country that it once went to war with. And I think the Indian politician, Indian people are smart enough to understand the manner in which United States operate in terms of causing war in quite a number of regions without necessarily having a long-term interest of that country, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan. And we also see it in Hong Kong, that with all so-called promotion of democracy, the greatest losers are going to be the Hong Kongers themselves, who are inviting the giant within their own country, without understanding some of the dynamics, the reason that it is not for the people of India, it is the interest of United States to stop and limit the rise of China in international relation.
Yes. Now, also just looking at it from an economic perspective, Dr. David Monyae, you mentioned earlier on in terms of China, a country that has been flush with cash, and it still remains flush. And even with this pandemic, even with COVID-19, China, obviously one of the first countries that was hit, or the first country that was hit with COVID-19, but came out fairly quickly and returned life back to normal. And while the world will still try and play catch up to where China is at this point in time. But at the same time, we've seen some bad policies on the part of India. We know what had happened a few years ago, demonetization, and where they obviously got rid of some of the denominations in terms of their currency. And all of this had a very, very negative impact on India, on its economy at large. So from an economic perspective, even when one compares the two, that, although they are both economic powers in their own right, but China, again, far supersedes India, and it is basically ahead of the pack. And again, coming back to this provocation or a military standoff, it does appear that this would not be in the interest of India.
Indeed. And I think one would even say that China has much more smart economic policy, and it's flexible in its ability to really change. It's driven by the Chinese Communist Party, unlike India, where any project has to go through endless discussions, and it takes 5-6 years for one single dam to be built, where in China it just takes 3 to 6 months. So given all the advantages that China has, I think India needs to calculate and advance its own long-term national interest, that it's going to benefit more without really joining China or joining United States. I think it has to move strategically, have investment from Washington without really bringing in the military dimension, but at the same time being much more closer to China when it comes to economic for that market, which is a developing market, more than 400 million middle class in China. It's an advantage for India's products. Coming to the post-COVID-19 scenario, there are going to be challenges. And if you fully understand and follow China's politics, that China is not taken napping by the situation. It has been waiting for this moment, and it has been really moving inward in terms of developing its western provinces, relying much more on domestic instead of foreign direct investment. And it has more room to play with compared to India, and really move strategically, prioritizing strictly your Belt and Road countries, more than 60 countries, and quite a number of initiatives that China is taking, understanding what's coming. I mean, if to put it in crudely, for China, winter is coming. And I think one can see the writing on the wall that the United States is declaring war with China on all fronts. But in the long run, it won't benefit India in the manner in which the current prime minister is calculating and moving in terms of joining your Washington instead of being neutral.
Well, it's going to be interesting because my next discussion after we take leave of you, Dr. David Monyae, is to look at the new world order post-COVID-19, and we are going to be doing some analysis on and also looking at some of the detail in terms of what is expected to happen in the world post-COVID-19. But just coming to the issues surrounding leadership, and obviously you mentioned leadership, and again, yeah, we're talking about stability of leadership. And at this point in time, the Chinese obviously have got the most stability as far as leadership is concerned. And even though when one looks at Modi, and he is in a precarious situation at this point in time, and so is the person that, or the horse that he is backing in the form of Donald Trump. So both of them at this point in time are unstable, not knowing where they're going, what is to become of them. And this is where I think it even puts China in a much stronger position because they have got a stable leader.
No doubt about that. I think changes within India and the United States will be to the advantage of China. But in the long run, one foresee, with or without Donald Trump and Modi in India, China is going to face quite a lot of competition, negative views from Western countries, and I think it is ready for that. The entire global value chain, I think there's going to be destabilization on the global value chain. Some companies will indeed leave China, but I think there are plans in place within China to replace, when these companies leave, have their own. And I think it is a world in which, when it comes to technology, we expect a decoupling where we're going to have technology that is China aligned and technology that is United States aligned. And if we follow what's happening with Huawei and the entire 5G. So I think we need to brace ourselves as South Africa and as Africa that we should not get involved in the wars of big giants and big elephants fighting, and not joining United States, not joining China or India. We need to advance a peaceful world order and ensure that we protect our own continent, attracting more foreign investments. I think that is key for Africa's own development.
Yes, Salman Khan, I see you've joined us, and we've got about 5 minutes or so. And obviously, it's unfortunate that we have had obviously some issues connecting with you. But this requires a lot more discussion because particularly from your side, where you've done a lot of your research and into some of the historical issues and the background. But just looking at it, Salman, and just in closing, looking at some of the issues that we have been discussing, and in terms of we're seeing India. Where is India at this point in time? The United Nations Security Council, we know that is playing out in the background as well. And just how do you see all of this playing out? Yes, I think obviously we are having major issues as far as Salman is concerned. But Dr. David Monyae, just in closing, we've got about a minute or so. Just final thoughts on this topic before we take leave of you.
I think the world that we're in, it's a world that is changing. What we see with Donald Trump, with or without Donald Trump, some of these problems will continue. United States power is in decline, and therefore I think there's a lot of things that need to change at United Nations level. All multilateral structures are under threat. I think it's time for Africa to have representation and to draw in India and have China as a United Nations Security Council member. I think we are going to see a number of destabilization all over the world, and any war in India, China, or South China Sea has a negative impact on Africa, because China remains our trading number one for South Africa, for the entire continent. And therefore, we need to be prepared and ensure that we advance peace and security at UN and reach out to both our partners, the Chinese as well as the Indians.
Well, Dr. David Monyae, thank you very much for that and for your time with us this evening. We do appreciate it. We wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Dr. David Monyae joining us, and we must apologize. Yes, unfortunately, was unable to join us, but I'm certain that we will get him on another platform or another week, hopefully, to discuss this matter, because this is an issue that obviously is not going to go away. And when we come back, we are going to be taking a look at the new world order post-COVID-19. We've got two interesting guests coming up, Dr. Pilani Mtembu, Institute of Global Dialogue, and also Rutendo Matinyarari, Zimbabwean, with this is Zimbabwe Unite Against U.S. War, U.S. war atrocities.